Donald Trump has stunned the world by appearing to deliver a loud and clear warning to Israel's leadership. Halt the legal proceedings against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, or risk losing the powerful support of the United States. That is effectively how some observers have interpreted his recent highly charged statement. Right away, this sets the stage for a geopolitical drama rife with tension, international intrigue, and a spotlight once again falling on the unpredictable nature of Trump's political interventions. But what is really going on behind the scenes? And how did these seemingly casual remarks carry such a hefty punch, potentially threatening the long-standing alliance between the United States and Israel? Today, we are going to dive deep into this unfolding story, exploring the extraordinary landscape of personal influence, power politics, and legal challenges that now seem to intertwine the fate of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu more tightly than ever before. In this episode, we will unearth the threads connecting Trump's provocative words, Netanyahu's precarious legal standing, and the broader implications for a region already on edge. We will examine how a former trusted operative of the president, Lev Parnas, added to the swirl of speculation by labeling these statements a type of veiled threat, question whether Trump has a pattern of using foreign aid for personal leverage, and consider whether Israel's judicial system stands as a cautionary example to the rest of the world. Buckle up, because this journey will take us through the corridors of power, the stormy seas of international alliances, and the very heart of what it means for a sovereign democracy to withstand external pressure. In many ways, the relationship between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu has been painted as a vibrant, if sometimes fragile, partnership. Trump touted his closeness to Netanyahu for years, positioning their camaraderie as a testament to his success on the global stage. One public high point was the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, something that only a few years prior would have been considered too explosive for most American administrations to attempt. That moment showcased just how far Trump, as president, was willing to go to support Netanyahu's government. But times have changed. Now Netanyahu is facing an array of legal troubles. Corruption charges involving lavish gifts like cigars and champagne, which sparked widespread debate within Israel about the proper limitations on a political leader's financial relationships. Trump, in his trademark style, erupted in an online statement, decrying the fact that Netanyahu was being forced to sit in a courtroom over what Trump described as essentially trivial concerns, a possible reference to the so-called cigars, Bugs Bunny doll, etc. allegations. Some observers sigh with frustration at this dismissal, arguing that open investigations into misconduct cannot be reduced to comedic items or a single remark about petty luxuries. Then came the bigger moment that turned heads internationally. Trump wrote that the United States of America spends enormous sums, billions of dollars per year, on protecting and supporting Israel, implying that if Netanyahu's troubles were not resolved to Trump's satisfaction, such funding might land on the chopping block. For Lev Parnas, who had at one time played a significant behind-the-scenes role on Trump's behalf, this was like witnessing an old pattern re-emerging. Parnas has cautioned the world that Trump is now using his mighty voice to declare an ultimatum, that if Israel's justice system continues its legal proceedings against the prime minister, American aid could be withheld. Parnas described this as an insult to Israel's sovereignty and an unprecedented intrusion into a foundational legal process. Now, for those who have been following the complexities of American foreign policy under Trump, there may be an air of déjà vu. After all, there was that widely publicized phone call with Ukraine's president a few years ago that became the centerpiece of an impeachment inquiry, an event that still reverberates in political discourse. Trump's critics have long charged him with using foreign aid as a bargaining chip to achieve personal or political goals. In the case of Ukraine, it was about investigating the business dealings of Joe Biden's family in exchange for releasing hundreds of millions of dollars in military assistance, or so the critics claimed. Trump vociferously denied wrongdoing, yet he was impeached by the House of Representatives, though ultimately acquitted by the Senate. Whatever one thinks of that political drama, the theme remains relevant. In the eyes of those same critics, Trump's new statement to Israel could be perceived as more of the same. Let us address the bigger question. How does Trump's outspoken stance impact the stability of Israel's political environment? Netanyahu's trial has already caused a stir, with supporters calling it a conspiracy aimed at unseating a prime minister who, they contend, delivered seismic positive changes in Israel's security and diplomacy. On the other side, critics argue that no leader is above the law. Israel's vibrant democracy relies on the rule of law being applied equally, whether that involves investigating petty corruption or large-scale abuses of power. If Trump's words induce any real pressure on Israeli officials to moderate or dismiss the charges, that would raise profound questions about the future integrity of governance in Jerusalem. All of this is taking place against the backdrop of tense times for Israel itself. The talk of negotiating a deal to retrieve hostages from Hamas, the continuing friction with Iran, and challenges within Israeli society over policy directions carried forward by Netanyahu's administration swirl together in a perfect political maelstrom. The notion that an outside actor, let alone a former president of the United States, could complicate these matters by wagging a finger and hinting that we are not going to stand for this might well raise eyebrows in Western capitals. But let us not forget that Trump declared himself, time and again, a master dealmaker. He often portrays these public statements as tough bargaining positions, as though he is negotiating a real estate deal. That approach might have served him well in some contexts, but does it hold water when dealing with delicate international alliances and the sovereignty of a democratic nation's legal system? For the Israeli people, many of whom live under the specter of security threats, it may feel like a heavy-handed tactic. Now, if you are finding these revelations intriguing, take a moment to let us know you are here. Show us that this exploration of behind-the-scenes power plays resonates with you, and that you support continued dives into the vortex of political drama. Give us a quick thumbs up or a like if you are following along and appreciate this kind of deep analysis. The story becomes more gripping when we step back to examine why Netanyahu is in court in the first place. The Prime Minister faces multiple corruption cases. One involves allegations that he took expensive gifts from wealthy associates in exchange for political and personal favors. Another focuses on possible attempts to manipulate positive media coverage by dispensing regulatory favors for influential media tycoons. And this is not the first time an Israeli prime minister has found himself under the microscope for questionable dealings, though in Netanyahu's case, these are some of the most serious charges in recent history. Supporters continue to insist these charges are purely a political ploy by opponents who failed to beat Netanyahu at the ballot box. But critics say that ignoring such serious allegations would set a dangerous precedent. When Trump voices outrage that Netanyahu, whom he hails as a war hero, should have to sit in a courtroom, he channels the frustration of those who see the indictment as a personal vendetta. Yet from another angle, that entire line of thinking can be seen as an assault on judicial independence. Israel's legal community has traditionally taken pride in prosecuting wrongdoing, no matter how high up the chain of command it travels. It is not about humiliating a politician or a prime minister, critics would say, but rather about ensuring the system cannot be easily manipulated by those with power and influence. To further complicate matters, there have been ongoing controversies in Israel over a proposed judicial reform plan that many believe would make it far easier for the legislature and the executive branch to override judicial decisions. Some supporters of Netanyahu see this as a necessary rebalancing, addressing what they deem an overreach by activist judges. But opponents warn that this shift would spell disaster for the rule of law in Israel, possibly enabling the prime minister or others in power to evade accountability when faced with investigation or prosecution. Enter Donald Trump with his bombastic remarks, which effectively imply that the financial backing of the United States might be directly contingent on leaving Netanyahu unscathed. That is precisely what Lev Parnas chose to highlight. Parnas sees a pattern. Whenever Trump senses a situation that might undermine his allies or associates, he threatens to yank the resources or goodwill of the United States if a foreign government does not yield. Parnas' own experience in the Ukraine affair, where he was allegedly involved in attempts to dig up damaging information on Joe Biden, gave him a vantage point from which to judge whether the same playbook is being reused. For the broader international community, this kind of approach from any prominent political figure sets off alarm bells. Imagine if one country suggested to another, "You can keep receiving foreign aid only if you drop your legal investigations against our favored politician." That raises deeper anxieties about the integrity of global partnerships and the principle that no leader should be above the law, especially if the law is being enforced by that leader's own country. Another wrinkle in this saga involves the ongoing security and humanitarian crisis in the region. According to Trump's statement, Netanyahu was in the process of negotiating a deal with Hamas that would include freeing hostages. It is crucial to consider, however, how hyperbolic that claim might be. While there is no denying that Israeli officials explore channels to bring back their citizens, negotiating with Hamas is typically fraught with diplomatic hazards. The suggestion that Netanyahu should not be distracted by corruption, charges for the sake of forging peace or retrieving hostages, sounds noble on the face of it, yet overshadowing that stance is the fear that authoritarian-minded politicians might brand legal scrutiny as sabotage during crises. Where does that leave the United States-Israeli alliance? It has been rock solid for decades, anchored in shared strategic interests, cultural ties, and powerful domestic lobbies. Even so, experts recognize that alliances often survive changes in leadership precisely because they are robust and do not depend on any single individual's sentiments. That said, the personal dynamic between leaders can affect the diplomatic tenor in the short term. If Trump remains influential in the American political arena and is hinting that any Israeli official who does not shield his favored prime minister from prosecution could face consequences, that puts the alliance under a kind of stress test. Is it bigger than the personalities involved, or can it be twisted by the preferences of a single forceful figure? All of these issues swirl around the central question. Is a politician who rises to the top immune from accountability, or can the rule of law remain steadfast, no matter who wields power? Parnas frames this moment as a litmus test for democracy and sovereignty, and warns that it threatens to blur the lines between foreign policy and personal vendettas. Critics of Trump's approach do not see it as hyperbole. They worry that eroding norms might embolden future leaders to treat foreign alliances as personal tools rather than national interests. But we also have to acknowledge that Trump's words, though jarring, are not formal acts of the federal government. Trump is no longer in the Oval Office, which means his ability to enforce any threat is indirect, reliant on influence over American public opinion or the Republican Party. Yet, as his most loyal supporters remain highly motivated, there is a chance that if Trump regains high office or significant sway in the party, his position could move from rhetorical flourish to a genuine foreign policy stance. If Israel's leadership believes that scenario is plausible, they might feel the heat from Trump's remarks, particularly if Netanyahu's future depends on a delicate interplay of domestic and international support. Time and time again, we have observed the unpredictable manner in which major controversies under Trump's public spotlight can grow. They begin with a comment or a single statement on social media, which triggers a wave of discussion and speculation. Detractors see it as the tip of the iceberg for potential abuses of power, while supporters hail it as a bold way to cut through political correctness and hold supposedly flawed institutions accountable. In any event, these controversies rarely die down quietly. They grow, morph, and entangle other players. Will Netanyahu's legal team try to harness Trump's statements to argue that the corruption cases are interfering with urgent national security matters? Will Israeli officials remain steadfast that the prime minister's legal battles have no bearing on the broader alliance? And crucially, will this new wave of pressure further polarize public opinion, both in the United States and in Israel? So many challenges, so many unanswered questions. We do know Netanyahu's trial continues, albeit with delays and complexities. And we do know Trump invests heavily in personal loyalty. His critics even say that once he has championed someone, he expects unwavering fealty, but if he feels betrayed, his reaction can be swift and severe. Interestingly, Netanyahu has had moments of friction with Trump. For instance, there were rumors that Netanyahu congratulated Joe Biden on securing the presidency sooner than Trump might have liked, causing strains on what was once an apparently unbreakable bond. Could that have contributed to the tension we now see? Or is this more about Trump attempting to appear as a savior to allies in trouble, brandishing promises of unwavering public support, provided there are no real or perceived humiliations like having to appear in a courtroom? One can only imagine the conversation in Israeli political circles and among American officials, who must now weigh the significance and potential fallout from these remarks. Some might argue that the statements are unhelpful noise from a political figure hungry for attention, with no real policy weight. Others worry that every public outburst from a figure of Trump's stature plants seeds of doubt in Israel's leadership, doubt about how the United States might behave in the future, doubt about whether legal processes in Israel can proceed without fear of retribution, and doubt about whether personal relationships overshadow national interests. If you think these developments deserve more in-depth scrutiny, do consider joining forces with us by subscribing. That way, when more twists and turns surface, because they always do, you will not miss the next important reveal. Stay in the loop, be informed, and help us keep dissecting these real-world power games. For Lev Parnas, one of the most telling aspects of these statements is the personal dimension. The notion that American foreign aid, which is meant for defense and for supporting a national ally in a precarious region, might be harnessed as a tool to preserve Netanyahu's personal legal invulnerability. It is reminiscent of Parnas's claim that Trump's overtures to Ukraine were similarly crafted to serve Trump's political fortunes rather than broader policy aims. That parallel, for some, is chilling. Are we witnessing a pattern that might trickle into other relationships with other nations, especially if Trump's political future allows him to regain greater authority? Some international analysts note that it would be a grave development for American power if allies began believing that support hinges principally on whether their leaders curry personal favor with current or former United States officials. Given the complexity of the Middle East, some worry that disruptive signals from a major figure in American politics could lead other nations to rethink their alliances or to question whether Washington's strategic commitments are stable. This, in turn, might embolden adversaries who benefit from any hint of discord or confusion within a high-stakes partnership like the one between the United States and Israel. Meanwhile, Netanyahu continues to juggle multiple headwinds. His coalition includes parties that are staunchly to the right, and he has to balance their demands with the pressing needs of national security and the sometimes clashing concerns of secular and religious segments of Israeli society. On top of that, the Prime Minister remains mired in corruption hearings that could put him in a precarious political situation. Even if the charges do not result in a final conviction, the ongoing investigations and trials can eat away at his political capital. Trump's statement effectively lumps the judicial proceedings into a category of nuisances that should be put aside because of Netanyahu's past achievements and his ongoing negotiations. Yet the fundamental question is whether a leader can or should be granted immunity because of personal relationships and past accomplishments. Many Israeli citizens, no matter their political leanings, consider the principle of equality under the law a hallmark of their society, and they might bristle at the idea that an American figure could assert that the charges are worthless or that the Prime Minister's legal obligations should be suspended. Adding another layer, Trump specifically invoked the memory of working together to remove the dangerous nuclear threat in Iran. The Iranian specter has been a persistent concern for Israel and other regional powers, and it often serves as a rallying cry to unify different political factions under a shared existential threat. Netanyahu leveraged that fear to accentuate his strong stance on national defense. Trump takes credit for having hammered out or contributed to a strategy that heavily pressured Iran, pulling the United States out of certain deals and imposing new sanctions. This underscores the narrative that Netanyahu was an ally in that endeavor, forging a synergy that Trump regards as historically significant, and apparently, in Trump's view, enough to justify granting Netanyahu a pass on legal entanglements. Even so, the question remains whether the international community would follow suit in linking a leader's track record of security achievements to legal carte blanche. If Netanyahu is found guilty of corruption charges, does his role in security matters automatically overshadow accountability? If not, then Trump's message might be a blunt intrusion into sovereign affairs, albeit one that resonates with some individuals who champion the Prime Minister's achievements. If yes, that sets a precedent that could encourage politicians worldwide to claim that their strategic contributions make them untouchable. By labeling this entire set of statements an unprecedented intrusion into Israeli sovereignty, Lev Parnas intensifies the drama. Parnas presumably understands that behind closed doors, alliances can be messy, with leaders quietly leaning on each other for political support or hush-hush promises. That is often how diplomacy has functioned: discreet phone calls, backdoor negotiations, subtle trade-offs. However, Trump's approach is anything but discreet. His style is flamboyant, direct, and often posted online for the entire planet to see. Parnas's critique suggests that what might have been a typical behind-the-scenes conversation in older times is now broadcast in broad daylight. That transparency can be enlightening, but it can also be chaotic. Among Israeli citizens, responses vary widely. Some ridicule the idea that an American figure, no matter how high profile, could shape the course of their judicial system. Others feel genuinely unsettled by the possibility of being left in the lurch by the United States. Throughout history, the notion that Israel might lose support from its key ally has been a dread scenario. Israel's security apparatus depends significantly on funding and hardware from Washington. Although Israel itself has a robust defense industry and some of the world's most sophisticated intelligence capabilities, yet even if the threat is indirectly phrased, it could sow confusion and fear. Is Trump serious? Does he have the political clout or future prospects to make good on his claim? Would a Republican-controlled government down the line adopt Trump's stance? Or do many Republican officials remain committed to unwavering support for Israel, regardless of Netanyahu's legal struggles? Those questions do not have definite answers right now, fueling a sense that everything is up in the air. So, we find ourselves watching a high-stakes game that involves not just two controversial leaders, but also tens of millions of people who have vested interests in whether peace efforts progress, whether corruption charges proceed, and whether alliances hold strong. The fates of real individuals, like hostages potentially held by Hamas, are tangibly affected by the decisions leaders make. For some, that is alarming if personal ambitions can undercut the seriousness of this entire situation. In the midst of this intense landscape, remember that the rule of law, sovereignty, and accountability are foundational pillars that many democratic nations hold dear. If those principles are overshadowed by personal loyalties, the entire structure of global alliances could be undermined. This is precisely what makes these statements from a figure like Trump, even as a former president, reverberate so powerfully. What do you think will happen next? Will the Israeli judicial system bow to the magnitude of global realpolitik pressures and find a way to soften or set aside Netanyahu's potential consequences? Or will it stand firm and proceed with due process, despite all the swirling commentary and threats? Might these remarks fade into history as empty rhetoric? Or is this a sign that future American political figures, seeing Trump's tactics, could attempt similar maneuvers elsewhere? There is much yet to be written in this story, and we will continue to track each development, as well as the ramifications it might have for every person connected to this unfolding narrative. Each day, new angles appear. Each day, we await signals from across oceans or from behind the court's bench. The outcome remains uncertain, the tension remains high, and the stakes, well, they are absolutely massive for the political fortunes of Benjamin Netanyahu, for Donald Trump's global image, and for the enduring partnership of two nations that have historically had each other's backs. Stay tuned, stay curious, and stay engaged. These issues strike at the very heart of democratic values. And if they are important to you, keep watching, keep questioning, and keep sharing your thoughts. No matter how dramatic the headlines become, remember that your voice, your vigilance, and your ability to understand the nuances are crucial for the health of every democracy on Earth. Together we will see where these events lead, analyzing each twist in this profound international dance of power, ambition, and justice.